Okay, so White Sun, or Seto Surya, which also literally means white sun, um, is a film that came out in 2016. It follows Chandra, who is anti-regime partisan who travels to his remote village after about a decade away from home when his father passes away. And the film's main focus is looking at sort of the raw feelings and consequences and effects after the Nepali civil war and the consequences of Nepal's difficult political history, going from monarchy to democracy to constitutional democracy to a republic. And it's still reeling from the impacts of the civil war that it had. And it's nice to see a film that sort of looks at some of the impacts of that. There are many differing viewpoints on what's gone on, and the results of the political and government that has been created as a result of the civil war. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. And what did you both think about it?
I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a very delicate and simple film in a lot of ways. Like it's really like on its surface, just about a guy going back to his village and the sort of the life he left behind, and him feuding with his brother and trying to bury his father. That's the premise, and that's pretty much what happens the whole time. Just trying to take this body down to the river to bury it. But I don't know, it's just really well made, and it's very like low key for much of it and very artfully shot, but it has these moments of powerful emotion that burst through at different points. And yeah, I thought it was a really powerful metaphor for just like trying to navigate, trying to come back together like a nation, or, like families split apart, trying to come back together and reconcile, and a nation split apart, trying to come back and reconcile and do things right and figure out how they get back on the path and how they sort of come back together. So I don't know, it was really powerful, and there was a few moments where I sort of almost choked up. And yeah, I learned a lot. Like I knew nothing about Nepal's history, and I thought this did a really good job of not so much showing the grand events of history, but showing their impact on like everyday people.
Yeah, definitely. The in terms of actually what gets done, right, is he comes back home. He's got his father has passed away. Him and his brother just need to take the body to the river and cremate it. Like there isn't much to that process or story itself. But I also think it's a film that maybe isn't the best to start with if you don't know any of the background behind Nepali history. Although it can be a jumping off point to sort of find out about it, but I think it does sort of assume that you know some of the background behind why people are angry with each other and why they're sort of upset with each other. Although it does try and give you some hints to it, I don't think it does that completely or enough if you know absolutely nothing about it.
Yeah, I definitely found it very helpful to watch it with you and have you explain to me what different people care about and why they care about different things and why everyone's so angry at each other. Because I personally just didn't have enough background to understand what was like to understand the larger context. I do think even without that, it would be an interesting film to watch and it would be a good film. But it definitely helped to have someone there to sort of explain the context to me. In general, I just really appreciate the kinds of films that show things that are sort of adjacent to large events and conflicts. Because obviously the real conflict here is the civil war, right? But then what we're seeing is just this relatively small scale conflict of just this village and how the people in the village relate to each other, and sort of the contrast between the different caste generations and between people within the same family who hold different political ideas. And I think that's really well done in this film, and I really enjoyed it and found it very engaging and interesting and very heartbreaking at times.
Yeah, I think sort of when you're outside of the country we're looking at, when you see the word sort of civil war or guerrilla insurgency, you think big changes are happening and lots of things that impact absolutely everyone. But I think it's sort of recognition that life sort of goes on regardless of what's going on. I mean, I was in Nepal while the civil war was happening, and I remember, for me, life went on. I went to school. I went home. I played with my friends. There were things happening in the political sphere that, given I was too young, I didn't understand too much, but I could tell things were going on. But sort of life went on, and in this small village as well, life goes on. People die. They need to be cremated, according to the rituals that need to be followed. And regardless of the fact that there has been this political upheaval where people in the same village, people in the same family have been in opposing sides to it, they still need to get stuff done. Chandra and his brother need to make sure that their father get his burial, his cremation, and follow those rituals. So I think I'm sort of with Tanya that it's nice to see sort of the micro level impact from these sort of macro things that happen in the country.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of got the sense that parts of the village had stayed the same, but a lot had changed, and a lot of characters were trying to pretend things were the same in a way, especially like the elders. Like they were so dogmatic about how things had to be done, but they tell the carer off for touching him after he's died because she's a woman, and that somehow makes the body impure, and they can't take it through the front door because it's deceased. But there's no men to carry the body because presumably most of the village men have died in the war or gone away in the war. And a lot of the ideologies that were fought out in the war have obviously affected different characters. Like the woman is saying, "What the hell? Why are you treating me this way?" And they see a traveler carrying some things, and he's saying, "Why can't I travel on this road? It's my road. I travel it every day." And they're just scoffing, saying, why is this lower caste person talking back to me? So I think, in some sense, yeah, like everyday life kind of stays the same through the war and after the war, but obviously some big things have changed. And it's kind of, yeah, it's like tricky to negotiate that and I guess that's the same for everyone. Like in some sense, the family dynamics are always there, and the rivalry between the brothers maybe predates the war, and it's part of their personality. Maybe one brother is more traditional, the other's more rebellious or more progressive, whatever you want to call it. But the war just kind of intensifies that. I don't know. That was my reading of the situation. It's hard for me to know what's normal though, because I don't necessarily know what life would have been like, before the civil war in Nepal. But it felt like, yeah, that even though it seemed peaceful and normal, there were obviously fractures between people and within people that they were wrestling with. And I thought that was really well handled in the writing and the acting, just the sort of frustrated looks and glances and words not spoken and things like that.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a change in, or at least implied change in the behavior of everyone around them, because I think it's a civil war. They fought amongst themselves. They fought like the one of the brother was literally on the other side, and they fought against each other in a war that killed friends and friends around them. And I think that definitely adds a even greater sort of feeling of sort of resentment against each other. I think from the elders, there was this moment where one of the elder says, we have to keep these traditions, because if we don't keep these traditions, then we've lost everything, and we ourselves are lost. So it's a sort of recognition that the world is changing to such an extent from what they knew and what they believed, that if they don't keep these customs that seem arbitrary and unnecessary, they sort of lose themselves, right? The world that they know to be is gone, and no one around them sort of agrees with them on how the world should be, and that's something quite resonated with me, because growing up. So I'm part of the bound caste, which tends to be the caste, tends to be the sort of the majority caste, tends to be the ruling caste. And when I grew up, a lot of the information that trickled down to me, and bear in mind I was like somewhere between like 5 and 10 when some of these things were happening. I got the impression that the guerrilla insurgents, the Maoist party, the Maovabi party, they weren't the good guys here. They were the ones causing unnecessary pain and unnecessary suffering. But now, having to sort of having looked back at it and looking at sort of the what they were fighting for, a lot of what they were fighting for was democracy and freedom and to be free from the absolute monarchy that was in place. And I find myself agreeing more with them now in the present day, and looking at it from my perspective now, looking at the elders and their sort of customs and rituals. I do, there's a part of me that sort of scoffs and says, this is a ridiculous ritual. Why is this something still in place? Some of this is sexist and arbitrary. But having said that, there's something that the elder said when the elder said, if we don't have this anymore, we lose who we are or what we are. Really resonated with me and sort of gave me a perspective that maybe I'm not considering how important, the rituals in itself aren't important. It's what losing those rituals means to someone elder, someone who grew up in these rituals, someone and I think that's something that really hit me harder than I thought.
Yeah, and you can sympathize with that position, like the status quo that you lived your life by kind of gives your life meaning and routine and structure. And so it is kind of important to you, and you kind of want to pass that down to your children to give them structure and meaning and create this kind of continuity and stability. But yeah, when it's at the expense of other people's rights, that's obviously when it gets muddier and less fair. One thing I thought was interesting about the film was it wasn't necessarily cut and dry in its depiction of the monarchists and the Maoists, which I think are the two sides that are represented in the Civil War, in the sense that it sort of showed them both as sympathetic and unsympathetic in different ways. Like Chandra fought for the Maoists, and he's the main character, and they're the sort of winning side. But it sort of goes into the, with this orphan child that sort of attaches himself to Chandra, it shows some of the bad effects of the Civil War, the fact that, kids were orphaned by the violence. Some of the other revolutionaries are pretty gung-ho about continuing the Civil War and continuing the violence at all costs until they have total victory. And Chandra has to kind of talk them down from that. No, we need to find our way back, and we need to find peace with our countrymen and countrywomen. And also when he does sort of meet up with his one of his kind of Maoist commanders, he's living in this very sort of bourgeois, traditional decadence. And when he asks him for a favor, he says no. So it almost shows the corruption of some revolutionaries, that they eventually just become the replacement rulers. So I thought that was an interesting element, especially given that the Maoist party are the current governing force in Nepal, that it was able to balance those two perspectives against one another in a kind of like sympathetic way. Like it doesn't completely demonize the monarchist.
To me it felt quite nuanced in that way, really, right? Like I guess it is sort of leaning towards the Maoists by making Chandra sort of the main character here, but it really is sort of like illuminating both sides and giving both sides a voice, and I didn't feel like the film passed any strong judgment on who was right or not, and it was sort of less a judgment on who was right and more sort of just the acknowledgement that it all came with a lot of cost and with a lot of loss in different ways for different people on all sides.
Yeah, I think the film does a really good job of showing the fracture that's in place because following the Civil War. It will take time, and I think Nepal is still going through a lot of this. Democracy in itself hasn't worked out great for Nepal because even after the political system it has been set up as it is now, there is a lot of disagreement within the political parties, and recently the legislature had to be dissolved because there just wasn't a majority that could be found, and so it's sort of a lot of frustration as well that can be felt, where it's like we went through all of this fighting and loss of life for years, where we had families torn apart by ideologies, and then finally we got the democracy that was fought for, but then it hasn't resulted in any progress, some might say. Although Nepal did sign a constitution in 2015, one of the biggest complaints that I often hear is that things don't get delivered. So there may be a constitution that protects the rights of a particular minority group, but that means nothing if none of that is actually enforced or implemented or actualized. And I think because the political parties are still, it's a long process and it's very new, are still figuring out how to do all of that. There is a lot of frustration about the fact that we've got this democracy now, but it's supposed to be this thing that a lot of particularly Western democracies have, and it's something championed as something great and fantastic and a solution to a lot of problems, and unfortunately it just kind of hasn't resulted in something that Nepalis really see as being valuable. It's ongoing issues that's happening in Nepal.
I also got the strong sense that even within sort of what you might loosely call the same side of the conflict, like just between different Maoists, for example, there's a lot of disagreement on, like, while you might agree on sort of the general direction you want things to change in, you don't necessarily agree on how far things should go and like exactly how many things should change and how many additional rights people of lower castes should have and that kind of stuff. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think so obviously we in the film itself we saw the fact that Chandra was part of the Maoist party together with the people who came to help near the end, and he was part of the sort of the fracturing of that party who went into that peace process and became part of the political system. But then there were other offshoots, one who thought the peace process went too far, gave up too much, and they need to continue sort of fighting this fight. There was sort of a split off there, and a good sort of demonstration of that is even within that political party, even with the ones that did go into the political process, they themselves are also splintered right now in Nepali legislature as well, and this is the reason why there wasn't a majority, and there was a dissolution of one of the houses of I think it was the House of Representatives, which was dissolved in May 2021, and it's going through an election in November this year, I believe. There is a lot of disagreement about exactly who should be leading, what should it mean, what does the country need, not to mention COVID and all of that's going on.
What did you make of the ending with them losing the body and then finding the children having taken it down to the river to be cremated? Like, it felt hopeful in the sense that the next generation will figure out a way or carry on traditions or find a way to like resolve their differences and work together. But I don't know, I was interested in what you guys thought of that scene.
Yeah, I thought it was really optimistic because if you've got the daughter who was born from a mother of a lower caste, you had a kid who was orphaned, you had the bunch of kids who at the beginning were teasing and bullying the other kids, but then they all sort of got together and took the body to where it needed to go and start the process. And I thought that was like you said, Duncan, I thought it was sort of a really hopeful message of, the kids that the next generation will come together and figure this out and work together. And I thought it was a really good sort of symbolic message of that. I wonder if some of it is also something along the lines of, if these kids don't seem to see the differences between people, they don't even know what the war, they weren't there, they didn't necessarily, while they lost people, it wasn't anyone they knew. These are stories for them, and so for some of them, they don't have the same level of animosity, although some of it is still there with the kid who lost both parents. But still, they managed to come together and work together to fulfill the goal of this of what started this film. Right, the father needed to be taken to his and cremated. So yeah, I thought that was a very hopeful message.
And the children also manage to do something that the adults don't. Like when Chandra arrives and first talks to his brother, they say something like, "I'm sure we can get along for a couple days or so while we need to resolve this family thing that shouldn't necessarily have anything to do with the larger conflict." And they can't. They absolutely cannot put their differences to the side. And then the children, who are shown to have differences, like in the beginning, the kids in the village tease the girl about her grandpa dying and rotting or whatever, and then they tease the orphan boy and call him Donkey Boy or something. But in the end, they do manage to put those differences aside because there is something that needs to be done, and they just work together and get it done, despite maybe not being the best of friends and despite having their differences, which is something the adults didn't manage to do. And I guess it does sort of reflect on the larger scale that in the country the same thing is happening, right? That like adults of different political ideologies can't move past this and can't sort of find common ground to get together and do what's best for the country and what needs to be done. But these children can, so maybe there's hope there that the future generations can move forward together in some kind of way, despite having differences between them.
Yeah, it's like they have so much less baggage than all of the adults who are arguing about everything else except for how to get the body down to the river.
Yeah,
they do. I mean, the orphan boy, for example, does like clearly have stuff going on. Like he's lost his parents, and he clearly is understandably very upset about that. And I also I thought the scene between him and Chandra, where Chandra ends up apologizing to him,
that was devastating.
Yeah, that was such a heartbreaking and beautiful and horrible scene. Like everything, it was just, I don't know, that was a really good scene. And like also from the boy's perspective, because he sort of attaches to Chandra and then even like claims he's his dad and just sort of, I don't know, probably decides for himself that this is his dad now or whatever. And it feels like the sense of betrayal when he finds out that Chandra is on the side of the war that killed his parents. But they seem to reconcile over that, and Chandra does. Like, he doesn't apologize for the side he's been on in the conflict necessarily. Like, he doesn't say what we fought for was wrong, but he does apologize for the loss caused to that boy, which is a real and valid loss regardless of what side of the conflict you're standing on.
Yeah, and he knows that he needs to express that anger, and he just kind of says, just let him hit me, let him hit me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does feel a little bit, sort of the ending does feel a little bit defeatist in that, okay, yes, the next generation maybe will find a better approach, but it's what currently those adults are, they are the ones in power, and they will continue to be for a while longer. And it feels a bit defeatist to say, well, they just have no way of moving forward here. And it has to, we just got to sort of wait until the kids sort of grow up and come into power, and they're the ones who will hopefully not have as much baggage, which is optimistic, but also feels a bit defeatist.
Well, I think the example that the kids set for the adults touched them, especially the way the adults follow the kids down to the river to help them, and even the priest, who's the sort of staunchest traditionalist. His expression seems quite moved by what the children are doing, or he seems mystified in some sense by what he's seeing. New possibilities might be opened up.
Yeah, I definitely got that sense as well, that the adults also sort of acknowledged the children managed to do something here that needed to be done that we didn't. We didn't manage to put our differences aside, and they did. And then the adults do go and help out and work together, and everyone ends up working together. It's not they just leave the children to sort this out and continue their squabbling. Like, they do follow the children's example of not focusing on their differences and just working on what needs to get done in the end. So yeah.
Having said that, though, so with the kids sort of having less baggage, I think there is some of the fact that the kids pick up what the adults around them are saying. like the daughter clearly picks up on who her dad might be, or what the stories her mum tells her, and all of that, and same thing with the kid who was orphaned as well. He probably doesn't know exactly who killed his parents. He was probably told that someone in the Maoist Party killed his parents. I mean, they were probably in the Civil War, but it's a lot of yes, they may have less baggage, but they also pick up the feeling and attitude and the way the adults treat each other. And I think that's quite interesting you put in there as well, is that, while they do at the end put their differences aside, they are also picking up on all of this animosity that's going around.
Yeah. And it's interesting that two different characters both kind of attach this fatherhood status to Chandra, neither of whom he's the actual father of. I'm not exactly sure what the film's trying to do there, but it seems like there's these kids who are yearning for a father figure to teach them what to do or play some role in their world that they're just not getting. And maybe that just speaks to the general fracturing and erasing effects of the Civil War. But I guess maybe it also speaks to the sense that tradition does kind of play a role. You do want someone to model yourself after. You do want some structure or stability in your world to help you figure out how to live your life.
Yeah, I also thought it was very touching that he, like in the beginning, he's fairly resistant to it, and he keeps sending the kids, or like trying to send the kids away, and refuses to sign those papers claiming to be the father of the girl. And then later on, he seems to just sort of accept it, like maybe sort of from the scene where he apologizes to the boy, and then afterwards he's seen walking with the two children and holding their hands and so on. Like it just seems like he's sort of growing into that role that they've projected on him, that he's quite resistant to in the beginning. And he does say at some point when his wife asks him, like he says he never had any children. I don't think it would have fit within the scope of the film. I don't think it would have made the film better. But just from a personal perspective, I would have really liked an extra 10 minutes telling me what's going to happen afterwards, and ideally with some nice, lovely wrapping up of him getting back together with his wife and they adopt the two kids or something. That wasn't that wouldn't have fit into nice. The film, but I would have very much enjoyed that.
Yeah. That would have been really nice. What did you guys make of the animosity between the girl and the boy? The fact that she keeps trying to ditch him while they're following Chandra.
I thought it was funny that she tied up the brokerage thing to Nepal. I mean, I guess sort of at face value, it's just sort of the sense of this person coming back who she, in her head, had decided was her father. And then that gets called into question, and she finds out that he's not her father. And then there's this boy coming that's like allegedly his son, which is the role she felt she should have had, that role of his child. And then there's this little usurper coming in. So at face value, it like makes a lot of sense that she'd sort of feel that way. I'm not sure if there's like something deeper or symbolic here that the film's trying to do.
I think that's a good explanation. Yeah. I had a couple of other questions. One was about the name of the film, White Sun. Is that a reference to the flag of Nepal? That's where I read that somewhere.
I'm not 100% certain. If I had to make a guess, that's what I'd imagine it's about, just because of the sort of the content of the film. But I'm honestly not sure if that's why it's called White Sun.
The other question I had was, who betrays the Maoist rebels at the end of the film? Was it the priest?
Oh,
who
I
calls
see.
The police to come and gun them down.
You know what? I was never clear. I wasn't clear on that. I think it went something along the lines of he went to ask the police for help first. I don't know whether the film explicitly tells you, and maybe it needs a rewatch, but I thought it was something along the lines of, the police kind of assumed that he was going to go ask the Maoists anyway, and so they were just waiting to ambush them. Either that, or like his old comrade, his commander, betrayed him and sort of called the police. I really couldn't tell exactly where that came from.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I wasn't sure if there was meant to be a clear answer, but it sounds like it could be a couple of different possibilities.
Yeah. Can we also just reflect for a second on how horrible it is that in the dark, when they were told there were women and children, they just like shot quite randomly at this group of people. Like what?
Yeah.
I was so, I don't know, I did not have a good time watching that. I was so worried.
Yeah, it's like
No.
it's the sort of the context. I just think it's amazing this film existed in 2016 when, I think 10 years before that, or maybe a little bit earlier, maybe like in 2004, 2003, this film would not exist because I remember very much Maoists being sort of branded as the terrorists, right? Because the ruling party, I think the monarch issued a command to the army to capture them and destroy their party, and it's just is kind of amazing that sort of 10, 12 years later, now we have this film that sort of looks at them not from the perspective of these people are the enemy or they were terrorists, but quite a sympathetic view of this civil war happened, people died, villages were fractured and families were fractured, but they fought for a cause that was just. I think is part of the message that was being sent here, and I think it's kind of amazing that happened, but very much a reflection of the fact that the monarchy lost. The monarchy was dissolved, and the Maoist party took over as formally went into the political system itself, and are part of the ruling system now. So I think it's clearly a reflection of that this sort of film can exist, but I also think it's crazy that it happened within the space of like 10, 12 years.
Yeah, it is surprising that this film would get funding and wouldn't be censored. I guess because a lot of, Western perception of communist parties is that they, won't allow criticism of their history or their actions in the past. I guess Nepal's a little bit different because it's still a democracy. Like the Communist Party is just one party among others that could potentially be voted in, but it's obviously the biggest party at the moment. I think that's the case, is it?
Yeah.
But it's still a multi-party system.
Yeah, still a multi-party system, but there is a bit of disagreement between sort of the majority parties as well, and that's why they're sort of struggling to have a unified approach to things, which isn't helping when COVID needs to be dealt with. Yeah, it's definitely the case.